So the first nominee is the Royal Armouries, based in Leeds, but the project is a partnership between the Royal Armouries, which is actually the UK's national collection of arms and armour, and also one of the oldest museums in the world, and a multidisciplinary team of academics from Sheffield, York, and Cambridge. I'm going to hand over to Mark Bennett, research manager, to run us through the project. Thank you, Mark.
No, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone out there in the ether for coming along. I think everybody's understandably excited about the potential of artificial intelligence. There are many, many sectors in which the widespread use of AI offers the potential for a quantum shift in capacity. Given how the heritage sector has been underfunded and perhaps, dare I say, undervalued over the past few decades, it's entirely understandable that we might seize on the opportunities offered by AI. In particular, many institutions face the prospects of decades of cataloguing before the majority of their collection reaches minimum standard. Under those circumstances, the use of AI tools become very attractive. If AI can be used to identify and tag images, as it has at the National Museum of the Royal Navy, or add alt text, as it has done at the London Museum, then surely it's only a matter of time before it starts to be used more comprehensively to generate cataloguing data. Instead of decades, we could see baseline catalogue entries for entire collections generated in weeks or months. Indeed, the Towards a National Collection programme, funded to the tune of almost £20 million by UK Research Innovation, has called for museums to open records to various forms of automated and collective enrichment and unlock the generative potential of AI to create new data in real time. Nevertheless, any new technology runs the risk of outstripping both the ethical and legal frameworks around their use. That's one of the reasons that the Arts and Humanities Research Council funded the Bridging Responsible AI Divides programme, or BRAID for short, which was intended to help accelerate some of the thinking around the ways in which AI might be used ethically. And that's where we came in. So, as mentioned, the Royal Armouries is the UK's national collection of arms and armour. We actually started life as the royal stockpile of military material held at the Tower of London just after the Norman Conquest. Between roughly the 16th century and the mid-19th century, we were simultaneously a functioning arsenal that marshalled the power of the British state and a tourist attraction. After the Crimean War, which I hasten to add was not entirely our fault, we shed the functional aspects and became just a museum. For those who aren't familiar with the museum, we feature objects from across the globe, from Japan, North Africa, the Middle East, China, and of course, India. That Indian collection really got its start with three major tranches of material from the mid-19th century. The first was a gift from the East India Company intended to showcase the martial power of the recently defeated Sikhs and Afghans. The second was material intended to urge the British craftsman to up his game and purchased by us from the Great Exhibition. And the third were objects seized in the aftermath of the Indian Rebellion of 1857. These tranches sparked a drive for collecting that has lasted beyond the colonial era, and I should emphasise that the colonial part of the collection is only the nucleus of a much larger body of Indian material that we hold. When the brain call came round, we were already in contact with an existing research centre, the Centre for Drones and Culture. They had an interdisciplinary team from computer scientists and digital culture specialists to political historians. And so we're confident that they could provide insight into the pitfalls of AI if they were only given a suitable test case. Now, for our part, we were already somewhat concerned about the foundations on which AI might build. We are very aware that history is written by the winners because much of our collection consists of the things that we used to win. We know a great deal about this armour of Henry VIII on the left. Not only do we know the owner, which is a rarity in our collection, but we suspect it was decorated by Giovanni da Maiano, and we know that by the 18th century, female visitors used to stick pins in the lining of the codpiece in the hope that this would enhance their fertility. However, compare this exceptional royal armour to this dagger in the centre. Almost every adult male in medieval England carried one of these daggers on a daily basis. And yet most of what we know about them is what the authorities cared about. We know in 1388 and again in 1597 that men below the rank of gentlemen were banned from carrying them, even though this had very little effect. We also know in 1348 there were complaints that women were wearing these daggers on their belts, and presumably again very little was done about it. Likewise, the taking of trophies almost inevitably cuts an object off from its cultural heritage. These breastplates you see at the base of our Hall of Steel were captured from the French in the 1620s and have been trophies far longer than they were functional objects. We have to rely on other scholarship about French society, economics, and the military to set them in their proper context. Power disparities, therefore, mean that the data that we hold about our collection is incomplete. And this is all the more true in the colonial sphere than in the medieval one. In the era of empire, knowledge was a tool of control. The suppression of indigenous forms of knowledge, such as traditional medicines, and their replacement with Western forms was a vital part of rendering a colonial population tractable. Where indigenous knowledge was recorded, it was often done so by Western writers who interpreted and interpolated what they learned and were writing more for the benefit of other Western scholars than with the intent of preserving a particular body of cultural heritage. These Indian objects arrived in a country with very little knowledge of Indian arms and armour or Indian martial culture. They were exotic, they were oriental, but they were really little more than that. Sadly, the first tranche actually seems to have arrived with detailed notes from the East India Company, stating with minute exactness the places where they were made and the races by whom they had been used, but which, as far as we can tell, only survive in a few chance remarks in a very early catalogue of ours. Furthermore, in the aftermath of the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British seized and destroyed existing arms wherever they could lay their hands on them, a process that you see depicted on the slide here. Some objects, but not very many, were left, and a much larger body of socially constructed, uncodified knowledge about those weapons and their role in society was lost. We therefore agreed to submit a joint proposal that would focus on our Indian collection, and the AHRC very kindly smiled on it. The timescales were relatively tight, which meant that we had to be fast-moving and above all open. We shared detailed data from our collections management system on which the team could perform analytics about the quality of data that might be available for AI processing. However, we also walked through all the other sources of data that feed into the catalogue, which in our case includes the traditional paper catalogues or the blue books, which are not yet digitised. Finally, we were honest about what we saw as the limitation of sources. We were willing to acknowledge that despite the significant contributions of Western scholars of arms and armour, there was a much wider body of knowledge that they were unaware of and had no access to. From this observation leads to the significant risk that cataloguing objects based on existing data perpetuates inadequacies and inequalities given the source of that information. Secondly, although it's possible to bolt on an AI interface to data in a catalogue and to present the information that it relays as coming from the Indian maker or the owner of the objects in question, ultimately what you're doing by doing that is to put colonial words in someone else's mouth. While the project was running, we hosted a workshop at the museum which had around 50 attendees, including academics, digital storytellers, AA practitioners, and delegates from local, regional, national museums. Some of this session focused on AI literacy. For instance, the cost in energy and fresh water of processing vast amount of data, the extent to which services which are often billed as AI are actually manually processed by people in the developing world on incredibly low salaries, that sort of stuff, with the rest of it focusing on the specific pitfalls of working with colonial collections. And since the end of the fieldwork, the project's initial findings have been part of a UK parliamentary showcase, as well as cited in an internal UNESCO report. If you're interested to find out more, the major output from the project will be a toolkit that can be freely downloaded and will feature principles for the use of AI, drawn from the Armouries case study, but will apply across the sector. It should also help suggest means of navigating other issues with collections data that arise from similar asymmetries of power, not just race, but class and gender, which obviously applies across our collection too. Now, the toolkit is just coming to the design phase, but it should hopefully be available shortly. It will be on our website for download, and we will probably launch it more comprehensively. Now, I appreciate that in a contest about putting data to work, we have in fact largely been focused on the ways in which data may not or should not work. However, being involved in the project really challenged us to think about how much we take for granted in our own data. It's been a very valuable milestone in our efforts to manage our collection and their associated data in a more conscious and ethical way. Thank you very much.